So let's welcome our guest, Mr. Khan. Good morning and welcome, sir.
Hi, good morning. Good morning.
Very good. All right. So let's get into it. Cybercrime and its dangers. Obviously, and let's speak to what happened on Friday. Obviously, simultaneously, threatening the use of cyberspace, more or less, to create havoc. Just respond to the dangers of and the effects. Obviously, children may be still traumatized given that some vomited and fainted and so on. That is clear and a present danger. Speak to us about the effects of cybercrime using that as an example.
So cybercrime is something that has been around since for the last 20 to 30 years or so, since the internet has came about, since computers have been networked, and so there have always been dangers to people's data, dangers to people's privacy. It's becoming more and more prevalent now, simply because we, as a country, as a people, or as companies, have more data online, more to lose, and so you find that the frequency is a lot greater in terms of cyber threats, and you find also that the threat themselves have evolved. So many years ago, threats may have been more of a simple type nature, going after simpler objectives. Things are being more complex now. The threats are evolving, and so when we look at what happened with the school situation, as you mentioned, uh, you know, that it's not so much that was so much of a cyber threat, in the sense that there was a vulnerability that was, that a resource was compromised, or there was some hack, as people like to say. So as far as we know, there was no hack, there was no database or data being compromised in any way, no theft of information or data. What happened was someone used good old internet, which we all use. You use the internet, I use the internet, and someone used the internet to forward a message that we would deem to be malicious and possibly of an illegal nature. And so as I said, it's not really so much of a cyber threat, but they did use an electronic means to get their message across. And so, what that means is that, we have to ask a lot of questions on that topic. Where did they get all of the email addresses from? Is it that they sat down and they Googled all of these schools and made a list of all of the email addresses? And so, is it that they use some form of AI to generate the message? So yes, the message was received in an electronic means, but again, it's not really so much of a cyber threat.
Okay, Mr. Khan. So, and we hear you, and you spoke about AI, and I want to get into that later on. But in terms of, let's look at it like this: the illegal usage of any communication device to commit or facilitate in committing any illegal act. And you mentioned the technology, and since the advancement of internet, persons are finding different ways to utilize this for positive and also for negative. But what are some of the dangers that we are seeing? Because let me just give our viewers a backdrop. You are currently the principal and managing director of Agility ICT Solutions Limited, a technology and business solutions provider based in Trinidad and Tobago with clients throughout the Caribbean. And your company focuses on technology planning and ICT adoption, with the underlying premise that a company's technology infrastructure must support its business strategy. So that's just a backdrop as to the company that you're associated with. But the dangers, what are some of the dangers that we are faced with nowadays in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean by extension when it relates to cybercrime?
So the dangers are definitely your loss of data, loss of assets, damage of assets. And when we talk about assets, we talk about your company assets, your personal assets, whether that be data or that be even tangible things in that regard. Cyber threats could extend not only to loss of data and assets, but shutting down of systems as well. So, in this case, we with the schools, we had an issue with the school system being disrupted. Now you can have an issue where it can be the oil and gas sector, it can be the health sector, and so because you have to remember that now so many of our systems are online, so many of our systems are interconnected. We rely on the internet, we rely on data, we rely on cloud hosting and cloud storage and all of these things. And so someone can easily, well, I wouldn't want to use the word easily, but someone can cripple a system that relies upon it, upon the internet. So you can't cripple the energy system, the oil and gas system, the healthcare system, and those are some of the dangers that we face. Identity theft and so on, some of the dangers that we face, and we have to mitigate those risks. And I don't know if we would get into it in perhaps one of your questions further down the road, but the solutions really, and I don't know if you want to talk solutions, but the solution has a lot to do with governance. And governance is a term that a lot of people may not understand fully what governance means. And governance really consists of multiple areas. So you have risk, you have compliance, you have controls, and you have audit. Some of the areas within governance. And I guess if time permits, we could dive into some of those solutions and what the country needs to do to protect ourselves.
Okay, before we go into risk and compliance, what are some of the devices used by investigators to solve some of these cybercrime acts? You can touch on the school situation, but what are some of the devices used? And are we equipped?
I am not in a position to answer whether we are equipped or not, because I do not have intimate knowledge of what the cybercrime division, the tools that the cybercrime division has, from the TTPS, that is. Now, I can say that we are equipped to, from a private sector perspective, we do have a number of tools that can assist in finding a perpetrator. In this particular instance with the school, as I said earlier, it's not so much that a system was compromised. It was more or less just an email used. So yes, we have certain information on where that email came from, right? But now the thing is, with some of the technologies that can be used, you have what you call a VPN, or virtual private network, which essentially means that you can you can send an email or send a message and appear to be in America or in Australia. It's a technique called spoofing, where one can either impersonate another, look from another location, or hide their location entirely. And so we can do some digging. We can use the tools to try to track that email. The email server itself that was used to send the emails to the schools. It's a company that does encrypted emails. They provide an encrypted private email service. Perhaps a little more private to the more mainstream services we may know, like Microsoft and Gmail. And so whoever was doing this knew or had a good idea as to hiding or concealing the identity. Now, we would need to obviously investigate. We can't stop there and say, okay, they used a private email server, talk done. We must continue to investigate and continue to go until perhaps we meet a roadblock. Because many mechanisms can be used technology mechanisms, software mechanisms can be used, as I said, to hide one's identity or make them appear to be somewhere else or to be someone else. But perhaps in this particular case, perhaps they did not go through all of those lengths to conceal identity. So we must investigate. And as I don't know, as I said, the tools that are available to the police service, but privately we can do a certain amount of investigation.
Very good. All right. One of the tools of hacking, or well, hacking is a part of cybercrime. But let's talk about hacking and what hacking entails. For example, someone could hack my information and steal my identity. That's another cybercrime. Of course, misuse of my website and a number of other areas, distributing child pornography. So let's go back to hacking. What is hacking really? And how does one get access to, or how does one become a hacker?
Well, becoming a hacker, I mean, you have many mechanisms, right? You have quite a lot of information online now, free videos, free tutorials. There are many groups and even YouTube channels that can teach that. Now, we must also understand that hacking is not necessarily a bad thing. You have, if you want to say, the good side and you have the bad side. You have the white hats and you have the black hats. So one can, in fact, enroll in a legitimate course that offers hacking, or we would like to say, vulnerability assessments, penetration testing, and that sort of thing. So the role of a hacker, since you're using that term, is someone that is used in a good way in many cases in terms of law enforcement. Companies would employ such persons. We would call them a security consultant, right? Which is a term that we prefer, to harden and tighten their security systems. Because, of course, if you're protecting yourself against hackers or malicious persons, you yourself must know the game that they're playing. You yourself must be familiar with the technologies that they are using. And so security consultants and experts are used to harden environments, harden companies, their infrastructure. And to answer your question about how this happens and how this works, well, we have quite a lot of different technologies and systems being used worldwide. We have cloud systems. We have our information being stored in clouds. On the cloud, we have our mobile phones. We have desktop PCs that we use computers every day in work. We have various network systems. And each of these systems, be it some of the software that we use or some of the hardware devices that we use, they all have vulnerabilities and weak areas.
All right.
And a hacker, really, their role is to exploit those vulnerabilities and exploit it for a malicious intent or purpose in order to steal some information.
Very good.
Or cause some sort of damage or havoc.
All right. Well, some companies would set up their firewall. That's to prevent any hacker from breaking into their website and whatever information they may seek. How secure and should schools now, given that invasion of or use opportunity to send threat and so on, should there be firewalls, and how safe are firewalls in those instances?
Well, I would want to just briefly say that everything is penetrable, right? There is no 100% safe. You look at eBay, you look at Amazon, you look at Google. At some point or the other, even major financial firms, they have been compromised at some point or the other. So it really comes down to managing your risk. And just to answer your question in terms of the firewall, yes, of course, firewalls is what is required to bring that added level of security. You can also go a step further to implement something called an IDP system, which is an intrusion detection and prevention system, which is similar to a firewall, but it goes a little bit more in depth into filtering out some of that data. So perhaps in this case, with that email being sent to the schools, an IDP or an intrusion detection system would have flagged those emails. And perhaps it would have blocked those emails from coming into the schools. Now, it would not have found or detected who the sender was, and it would not have stopped him from sending an email or making a threat, but the message may have not reached the school, and it may have been flagged as a dangerous message.
Okay, understood. And I'm listening to you describe what could have happened if they had that system in place. But I'm also thinking about if that system was in place, then the public would not have been advised as to the dangers of a bomb threat and probably would not have reacted. But regardless, looking at what you spoke about earlier with regards to governance, you spoke about risk, compliance, controls, and audit. I just want to just go a little deeper into that, those four factors. What should we do as a nation to, with the inclusion of these four factors, Mr. Khan?
Right. So most companies, individuals, even governments also, what we need is for this particular situation, we need some sort of a central plan, a central division or response unit to deal with these kinds of things, to handle these kinds of issues on a national level. And before we get into that centralized policing type operation, coming back to a question about governance. So any government or any corporation, the role really is to analyze the risks and the threats. And so it's not, yes, implementing the hardware devices and the firewalls are a part of it. But when we talk about governance, we're talking about the policies that the company must adopt, right? What security policies we must adopt. Measuring your risk, looking at our crown jewels. When we say crown jewels, we mean what assets do we have that can be compromised electronically? What do we want to protect? Of course, there's a cost to protection, right? Is it that as a company we can afford to protect everything that we have digitally? Bearing in mind that a part of protection involves protecting your employees as well, right? Not only your assets and so. You talk about compliance. So, for example, in the financial sector, you have something called PCI DSS compliance, which is a regulatory international standard that a bank or financial institute must have certain softwares and hardwares in place in order to protect their financial data. When you talk about insurance companies, you have something called HIPAA compliance, which is a set of rules and policies and standards governing the storage and usage of insurance and health-related data. So we are not attempting to reinvent the wheel here. You have standards in place globally, best practices that we need to adopt.
Okay, and I'm looking at the classification of cybercrimes. Now, there would be individual, it may be a group, an organization, and so on. But in terms of, from your experience, in terms of the trend, what trends are we seeing in terms of the classification of cybercrimes, Mr. Khan?
Well, of course, they're getting more advanced, and you have, people saying that it's alleged that some of the crimes are being perpetrated by non-nationals. You have to remember that companies in Trinidad are vulnerable to the world and to anyone in the world, as well as local. So the data that we may have is vulnerable everywhere. So the threats are evolving. We've seen in the past with threats to some of the insurance companies. Of course, we've seen in the news about Massy stores being threatened, and so the threats are definitely evolving to more corporate, larger scale businesses, and who knows where that would lead. And I just want to mention that putting the things in place, like having your governance and your policies, and doing your audits every so often, is important, yes, but what we need, and what we need for the school system in particularly, the situation that happened with the schools, is something called a cyber incident response plan. This is something that companies adopt, and this is something that a government should adopt. A cyber incident response plan is, yes, okay, so we have the governance in place, we have the systems in place to protect, But what if it breaches? What do we do at that point? What is the response? The cyber incident response plan talks about the identification of the breach, categorizing it, classifying it. How do we communicate the message out? What are the roles and responsibilities of the stakeholder once an incident happens? And this is what we need on a national level to have this incident response plan in place.
All right. Can we do that collectively as a government, or the government taking that responsibility, giving the public schools and so on? That's one. But from a corporate standpoint, is it that the individual companies need to put the mechanism in place to prevent, to protect? We spoke firewall. They say that you said that can be breached also. What responsibilities does companies have now to ensure that there will not be a breach, to find out anything about me as a CEO of this company, and maybe to hack my banking account and that sort of thing? What should be in place from a collective standpoint and from a governance standpoint, and individually as well?
Right. So of course, in a corporate setting, the government of Trinidad and Tobago is not directly responsible, for protecting those assets. So it is up to the company to protect the company's assets and the employees and employee data and so. And so, of course, what we recommend is that a company engages with a cybersecurity consulting firm, an expert in the field, an MSSP, as we call them, as well, a managed security service provider. And so, the thing is that, let's say 5 to 10 years ago, companies were aware of the cyber risks, but not paying too much attention to it. And so a lot has to do, we have a long road to go in education and awareness, and for CEOs and directors to understand the severity of the issue, and the seriousness of it. And so once they understand the seriousness of it, you need to consult with a cybersecurity firm to harden up your environment, to do an audit of your environment, to see what systems you have, what may be vulnerable, where are your weak points, and what can we patch and what can we protect. So that is something that has to happen. We are now, as a country and companies in Trinidad, we are now beginning to take things a bit more seriously. But, it is a very costly exercise as well. And so companies have to weigh that cost with the risk. Because when you talk about risk, you talk about likelihood and you talk about impact. What is the likelihood of a risk happening? And if it does happen, what is the impact to the organization? And that likelihood and impact within risk has to be weighed with the cost factor as well for a company.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And if I'm just to chime in one, Mr. Khan. Now, I saw recently the artificial intelligence pioneer, Mr. Jeffrey Hinton. He left Google and he's warning the public about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Now, one person may mischievously send out those emails last week, or it could have been a group. But the involvement of artificial intelligence in not just that situation, but threatening our systems, both private or public. How dangerous is the artificial intelligence situation, and what are some of the things that we should brace for based on your data, Mr. Khan?
Well, some people like to think that perhaps artificial intelligence will take over the world one day, and they paint a very sci-fi type scenario, reminiscent of some movies that we may have watched in the past, where robots and AI will take over the world. And I'm not saying that is beyond the realm of possibility. At this point, it's still early stage in terms of the capabilities, but it is growing fast, and it is something that the world is watching to see how these technologies are evolving and whether or not they will become a danger to corporations, to human beings, and so. And so that is still, being looked at, but what we have to look at as well is not so much, AI taking over the world on its own, but people using AI, right, for malicious purposes. And that is a very real issue now. It is something, as I say, that is still being evolved and looked at. And the world is not really sure how to deal with some of these issues that are coming up. So, for example, you have one of the main issues is what you call deep fake. So deep fake is essentially I can put up a picture of a prime minister or president, do an animated video. I can clone his voice, and let's say on an election campaign or so, I can have a video coming out with him saying something completely erroneous. And we don't have all of the mechanisms in place as yet to detect those things. It's still evolving, and so one has to be very careful as to what they consume, what sort of media they consume, what they look at, as well as look at things with a grain of salt, some skepticism. Always try to validate your data, verify your data before data comes to you, because it could be not even real. It could be completely AI generated.
Okay.
Let's deal with companies trusting an individual, the IT guy. He's responsible for ensuring computers work well, repairing whatever, and he may have access to passwords in all the computers, whatever skill sets that he may possess, and is trusted with the IT aspect of the business. And he may be influenced by somebody offering him some extra dollars to have access to, whatever, maybe an account, as to, do whatever bidding that the evil one has plotted with him to do. How do we get, because again, we trust, IT individuals, people like you, to give us the right information. And not all of the CEOs and the big conglomerates, the big businesses are savvy to run their own IT aspect of the business. In terms of how that individual or those individuals are monitored to ensure that they are running a legitimate business and not engaging in anything that can cause danger to anyone.
Yeah, that is a real threat as well. And we do have had situations where we've had situations where there were particular IT individuals doing work, not necessarily compromised information in any way, but individuals may have left a company or stopped working for a particular company, and sort of left things hanging, not wanting to hand over properly to another firm. Another firm had to start over, don't have all of the passwords and credentials. And so we've had situations like that. But in terms of really trusting the individual or the company, that is a real issue. But you have to look at the credentials of the company, look at some of the previous works that they've done, their reputation, perhaps go on references. Of course, you have to have your legal things in place in terms of non-disclosure, probably some legal contract in place in the event that there is some sort of a breach, or in the event that data leaks out. And what I would say as well is have redundant services as well. So don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Don't have one IT firm handling all of your infrastructure. Have a redundant system as well.
Well, that's why I brought that up, to speak to that whole question of that email that was sent simultaneously to all the schools. That individual obviously has all the email addresses of all the schools, and you said the investigation should continue. Now, an IT guy such as yourself, what would be the first place, if you were to advise the police to look at? Maybe you may not need to give that information on air, given that that investigation is continue, or should continue, as you say. But people with like minds would think alike. That's what I'm getting. What would be the first place to look for an individual such as that, who have all that information, in your view?
Well, I would say that let's start with what we have. And so we have the name of the email service that the person used to send the emails, right? Now, one interesting fact to note is that email service, it resides in the EU, in Europe, right? And in order for any of us to use any software, we have to agree to the terms and conditions. A lot of times we check the box to agree to terms and conditions, and we don't even read it. This particular email service, a part of their terms and conditions specifies that their service must be used for legal purposes only. Now, if this threat was deemed to be illegal or some sort of a terror act, it means then that we now, as a government, as a country, have a right and have access to contact the government of that country, who will then in turn contact the law enforcement of that country, whether it be FBI or Interpol or whoever, and then contact the mail server company to try to get whatever information they can get, perhaps registration information, perhaps the person who created the account, maybe they used their real name, maybe they didn't use their real name. We don't know, so we must investigate these things. So I'm saying that because the user had breached the legal terms and conditions of this mail server, it now gives us an opportunity to knock on the door from a legal perspective, to contact the governments and the law enforcement abroad. But I want to say also that even if we can probably determine where the person sent the email from, whether it came from Trinidad or outside, again, the information we get may not be accurate. As I used the term earlier, the spoofing, so they can impersonate or imitate to be somewhere else. And even if we do narrow it down to say, okay, it came from Trinidad, we more than likely will not be able, from a cybercrime investigative standpoint, we may not be able to find the house or the computer that that person used. We may not even be able to find the person, because let's say, for example, it came from my laptop and I walked away from my laptop for half an hour and somebody came and sent a message from my laptop, right? It will be extremely difficult to find the specific individual through a cyber crime investigative mechanism. I mean, of course, you have other modes of investigation that the police hopefully can take, that can aid in finding the specific person. But from a cyber standpoint, it will be difficult.
All right, Mr. Khan, if there's anything else, we want to thank you for being here this morning. Anything else you want to share?
No, I'm good for now. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you. And of course, with people like you, we're needed in society today, given the battle with those who perpetrate evil on the cyberspace. Thank you very much, sir.
All right, thank you.